I want to talk a little bit about my very perfect granddaughter. Back up a little bit. I have three sons. I have a son, Douglas, who is my oldest son. I always joke that he was not focused at birth and is not focused now, but that's not true. He's a librarian and he's very focused. Then I have a middle son, Daniel, who wants to be a public official, and I've said to him, go make money. And then I have Aaron the last. Aaron was a surprise, a very pleasant one, but the very last surprise I will ever get. And then I have my very, very, absolutely perfect granddaughter. When my son complained to me that I had let her eat ice cream and cake for breakfast, I said, yes. She asked for ice cream and cake, and I gave her ice cream and cake for breakfast. He said, but you never let us have ice cream and cake for breakfast. I said, that's correct, but I'm not raising her. But I had now abided by the rules he wishes to establish, and I'll figure out something else to give her for breakfast. But I want to talk about her because she is not the next generation. She's 2 generations away. And I want to talk about the role sustainability plays in that. So I want to give a picture of both of King County, where I was really, really given the honor to serve them as the elected King County executive, and the things that we dealt with, and then the things that we needed to continue to do later, and some of the things I have been roped into doing since I've been retired, because when I left the HUD, I retired. As I told people, I love retirement. My sister-in-law sent me a note, said, and 2 bottles of wine, and the note said, you will find retirement is the next best thing to heaven. And I've gone to 2 bottles of wine are gone, but I'm going to send her a note and say that is so very true. I feel like I'm 18 years old again, and I don't know what I'm going to do in the next year or so, but I get to go on my next journey, and I'm going to have a good time finding out what excites me. But I want to go back to sustainability because it is so critical and so key. In King County, when I was executive, we were the largest county in the state of Washington by population size. We're home of Microsoft, the Boeing Company, Starbucks, Nordstrom's, Real Networks. We were a very tech-rich environment in regards to employees, although most people came on to manufacturing in our area. We're located next to the Puget Sound. We were, as a county executive, we have a growth management statute in our state, and the issue is how should we develop that growth management statute. We didn't call it sustainability. We just simply said, how do you manage growth? How do you mature neighborhoods? And how do you make the quality of life generally better? I remember when we had a meeting with Bill Gates, and Bill Gates said, the decisions you make will influence our ability to size up, because you don't come to the Northwest for weather purposes. Trust me. It was raining the other day when I was in another city, and it was really raining, and I laughed and said, I feel so at home. Our issue, though, was how can you have and instill a high quality of life? So when we first started our effort, we didn't talk about sustainability, we just talked about growth management. So I remember my first meeting when I was the county executive, where I brought in the environmentalists and our builders, who were at war for a very long time. The builders opposed me because the environmentalists like me. So I sat them in a room and said, here will be the rules I want everybody to follow. No suits in urban areas. I want urban areas to grow. I will join you in suits if anybody who wants to move outside those urban areas into our ag areas, into our rural resource areas, or into our forested areas, because we don't want growth there. The viability and strength of metropolitan areas is being very deliberate by where you want to grow, where you want to put your investments, and being really key. And as a result of that, that agreement was struck between 2 sides who did not like each other at the time, but who actually merged their interests. So 96% of all growth in King County was in our urban areas, and only 4% in our rural areas. We had 38 cities, and they continue to grow. They've grown so rapidly that we got another congressional district, one of the few areas in the north that actually added population. But it was really interesting because we adopted several other policies, and I'd like to tell you that were my ideas that they were not. I had a wonderful group of staff that came, and the rule with my staff is, if you take a risk and you succeed, I will praise you to the end of the world. If you take a risk and fail, I will applaud you if you take no risk at all, I will make it the longest day of your life. Because societies are dynamic, and therefore we needed dynamic models to work with. So we laid out what we called our protection of our forested areas. We didn't have a lot of money to buy forests. I had given a speech that zoning is as good as the political movement. That's all it takes. I remember the dean of elected officials for African American officials was Councilmember Sam Smith. And he used to say, 5 votes is policy on a 9-member council. And then I realized that we were busy zoning, but all we needed to do was have a change in the makeup of our council. And all of a sudden, those things that we thought we were protecting could be changed. And we had already done that. King County was once zoned 1 house per acre all the way up into the Cascade Mountains. Another group came back, although they couldn't take away the zoning right, said that we would not enable zoning at 1 house per acre because of the Growth Management Act, but that right still existed. And at any time after I was gone or somebody else could come, they could basically go back and say, let's go ahead and enable 1 house per acre. Would have totally changed our look and feel. So I gave a speech, and I remember saying to somebody, we have 190,000 acres of forest that are developable. They're within 15 miles of Seattle. Many of them are flat, served by roads, 190,000 acres. And I said, zoning is as good as the political movement, so we will buy them. And so I came back and my staff said, how? I said, I don't know. I just made the commitment, go fix it. So we developed transfer development rights, an easy transaction for us, where developers in urban areas could buy development rights out of our rural and forested areas and transfer those into urban areas. So as the urban areas began to grow and people wanted more density, it was easy for them to buy those rights for $15,000 because they could actually put it on a condo and that would be built into the price of an entire floor. So people like Paul Allen in South Lake Union became a major buyer of ours when he was redeveloping the South Lake Union properties. So as a result of that, we were able to save 100,000 acres. But we still had 90,000, and we bought them from a firm who was headquartered here, Hancock Insurance, called the Hancock Forests. King County owned a lot of its own forests. We use them because we take the material that people out of our waste system, we cook it very well, and we apply it to forests because it enhances trees. Matter of fact, and not an ounce of our material is ever left because the farmers in Eastern Washington prefer it over chemicals because it's considered to be an organic material. And so we knew a lot about forests, and we sat down with Hancock and said to them, you know, over my dead body, will you ever be able to develop your 90,000 acres and 7 lakes? And it'll be not only my dead body, but there's going to be a lot of dead bodies between me and you being able to develop it. But we'll give you an idea. You want a working forest, we'll make up the difference between what you would get if it was fully developed versus what you can get with just an harvest. So it cost us $22 million. So we locked that up. And our voters passed a constitutional amendment to our county because we are a charter county that said that you could, I told somebody, how would you unwind what we did? It was a simple question. You know, I'm not gonna be here forever, don't want to be here forever. Just, how would you unwind what I did? They said, you can't unwind what you did. You got development rights, you have conservation easements, you have conservation rights. Nobody can unwind those. Those are property rights, they're different to the property. I said, I don't care. Good attorneys could always unwind something. No offense to attorneys, but they could. So they found a way to do it. They said, well, it'd be really tough. Why don't we put it in the county's constitution? And it would be simple. Every acre removed out of forest has to be replaced by a like acre with the same environmental function, which means those are going to be 190,000 acres in perpetuity, a permanent wall against sprawl. We also did another report called Adaptation. We were working very much on reducing our impact on global warming, and I remember we were doing carbon modeling and all of that. And this person who was out here in Boston that we got back to Seattle, Jim Lopez, said to me, you know, you ever hear about adaptation? I said, No, Jim, I'm busy trying to lower carbon. He says, look, there's going to be global warming. You know that. I said, no, there's not, because everybody's going to adopt carbon modeling. We're going to reduce our impact. He said, no, no, no. No, there is going to be global warming. The issue will be its severity. So he said, why don't we go to the University of Washington and ask them at the School of Climate Change what they think. So I said, think about what? Think about King County in 2050. I said, it's going to be perfect, Jim. I mean, we've got all these forests, we've got all these streams, we've got all these rivers. I mean, why should I ask that question? He says, because you should know. And sure enough, we got their report. And sure enough, King County is not going to be exempt from the impacts of climate change. But one of the things that happened was that they came back with this report, and it said that the snowpack was going to go up another 1,000 feet. And therefore, an area that has snow as its primary source for water systems, we were going to have less of it. Matter of fact, we would have the same rates of precipitation, which meant the water would simply flow in flood form out to the Puget Sound rather than be frozen. So all of a sudden I realized we were going to have a water supply. So I announced that we were going to take our waste treatment systems and we were going to do already tertiary, but that we were going to do reclaimed water systems and use those for agricultural purposes and in-stream flows. And everybody said, great idea. Then I said, but we're going to have a lot of water because we have 125 miles of levees. So I said, I'm going to abolish all the flood control districts. So I announced it in a press conference. I'm going to abolish all the flood control districts. I have no authority to do that. Zip. None. And everybody said, oh, great idea. Even the flood control, wow, I can't believe they got away with this. All because we anticipated what King County would look like in 2050. And in fact, the voters approved a tax on themselves to rebuild our levees to 2050 standards, which will go well beyond the Corps of Engineers standards today. But we did more than that. We began to look at species change. We began to look at where we were going to build. We planned backwards in light of a 2050. Why make an investment today that you know will create a problem for you in 2050? Planning backwards in order to influence the future. So when I talk, and then we start talking about sustainability, because sustainability to us was all those things. It was an issue of being smart on planning, but not just putting out a planning document, but making the kinds of decisions to make it sustainable over multiple generations. Not just one, not just tomorrow, and not for just next year, but being able to embed policies in place that you know will carry forward so that my granddaughter will think that I had some value rather than a soft lap and money that I would give her as she got older, but a generation that would prosper. That's how you've got to measure sustainability. So we did adaptation. We did our forest recovery. But there were other issues that we did, which is that we were directing a lot of growth into the cities. But what did that actually mean to us by directing growth into cities? Well, a lot of our issue was the kind of growth and where it was going to go. We had an agreement by law that King County could target the amount of growth that should go into each and every single city. We had cities that said we don't want any affordable housing. And we said we don't allow enclaves under growth management. And anybody that wishes to maintain enclaves, whether they are based upon ethnicity or wealth or whatever other issues, is inappropriate in this society, and we would not support it. So we said we wanted mixes of housing, mixed income housing, rental, and as well as either you could own it, we call it could be either family, your personally owned housing or multifamily housing, mixed income, so that we would have a design. We also announced, which I had no authority to do, although I ran, the transit system reported to me, I said that we would no longer provide bus service in areas that would not adhere to our growth management standards. Because you cannot back out bus service and public transportation and talk about sustainability. You simply can't. And I'll get to those reasons in a minute. So everybody said, you know, And I remember the county council saying, that's our decision, and because it requires legislation. I said, okay, I just announced it, and here's the legislation. And our issue was to coordinate land use decisions with transportation systems. You have to do that. You have to do that. There is no such thing as saying, here is a community that's developing and not have a plan for how you're going to move people who are going to live in those communities. But what did we do wrong? We never did it regionally, ever. The two adjacent counties, one to our north and one to our south, said, you know, the executive there is kind of crazy, right? You know, he doesn't believe in the fullness of property rights. So why don't we go ahead and we will do self-contained communities, and we'll just continue to move and move away from larger core cities. And he did. Then he ran into a problem more recently, which is how do you pay for the infrastructure that is that far out because it doesn't pay for itself when you have people in your core cities saying we're not going to subsidize it. The default rate on mortgages there is 4 out of every 7 in the communities they built. In King County, it's 1 out of every 11. So what we found is that we were tight enough as a community to remove the two most important factors and why people defaulted today. I get so tired of the default discussion because it says that the person who actually bought the house oversubscribed. They got more money than they should have gotten for the house. They drove to qualify. That was true the first 2 months of default. It has not been true since that time. The reason why people default today in this country is because there's 2 costs they never considered: transportation costs and energy costs. So when they finished those costs, and those 2 costs were often greater than the percentage of income applied to their mortgages. Having families have a net 4 to 5% cushion after they pay their car, their fuel, their energy costs, and their mortgage. You can't live on that. One person needed to go lose their job, go to halftime, and it was all over. In our area, without knowing it, the people had access to public transportation and had already been using it. And so therefore, transportation costs were not a factor. We also incentivized, well before it was popular, building green, by saying that if you wanted to be first in queue, build green and do low impact designs, so that we did not have what we call the infrastructure required to control water runoff and all that. Low impact design and natural native vegetation. So in those places what we found is that people had less economic impact, and they thrived very, very well, and are thriving today. We still didn't do that regionally though. The North End, North County, and the South County didn't. They did not believe in sustainability. They did not believe in green housing. They did not believe in public transportation systems. They did not believe in the control of water runoff. So we end up with major listings, endangered species listings, on 3 salmon and an orcapod and 1 trout. And our issue under adaptation is that once we got our report, I announced that we were going to do our streams different, because we were at the south end of 3 species. And inevitably, because of climate change, they would become extinct. They would go north. Well, we didn't know what the replacement was. So I said, we will design all of our streams so that whatever salmon replaces them, in fact, does have a way of spawning. We knew we were going to have species change in regards to the trees we have. We are in a cedar forest, which are grand and beautiful, but we said this is going to be replaced by pine. Let's get used to that. Not going to be fun, not going to be pretty, but it's going to happen. That all the 4-legged critters to the south would be moving north into our area. So the idea was to prepare corridors for them and to design our species protection policies based upon that change. So we did that. The 2 adjacent counties didn't, but now they're being compelled to do that by the federal government. So when you talk about sustainability, we always want to put it in a window of 10 years or 20 years without thinking long term. There's nothing wrong with adaptation, but pick 2050 as a target and see what the world looks like when you talk about 2050. Where are your rivers going to function and how are they going to function? What species are going to change? And why? Everybody who is a deer hunter realizes that deer don't die for any other reason than predators and the fact that they are parasited to death. What do we find though? We found that the parasite they had was no longer the parasite existed, but the predator that preyed on it, the wasp, had moved to Canada. So we had no replacement. So we were having substantial elk losses. And somebody said, what do you do about that? And I said, there's nothing we can do until whatever's been killing those things in Oregon and California actually migrates here. So the University of Washington says, well, why don't we introduce him in those areas? I said, well, maybe it's not warm enough, but it's a good try. So that's what we're doing now. The idea is, though, to continue to think about your policies for the future, for the long term. So what does this all mean? We didn't deal with the one issue that we should have dealt with. The one issue that, to me, was a result of I had my family back in Washington, D.C. I'll never forget. We took it back to Washington, D.C. I said to my kids, there's a press conference at the Joint Center. It's an African-American think tank. Go to the press conference and bring all the paper you can back. And they said, how do you know there's going to be paper? I said, it's D.C., it's a press conference. There's always a lot of paper. Get all the paper you can. The Joint Center announced that 35% of African-American males under the age of 35 would have nothing in common with the rest of society except their death. So I remember looking at that, and I said, my kid said, Dad, that's just hardcore inner city stuff. You know that. It's not happening out in our area. So I said, well, I don't know. Why don't I just go ask all of our demographers? It took them 18 months, because once I said, here's the report, please read it, and come back with a report, they got into the report more and more and more. The high watermark for King County for African Americans was 1970, 50% home ownership, 48% two-parent families. In 2006, it was 32% home ownership, 28% two-parent families. Latinos had as dramatic a fall. Subgroups of Asians, Pacific Islanders, and Filipinos in particular had the same demographics. And it just basically meant to us, now probably say, why should we be alarmed by that? Because at 22% that is considered to be societally dysfunctional, we were going to have dysfunction being normal in several years. And I can tell you that today's data in this country is that 25.6% of African Americans have two parents in a household. Latinos are a little bit higher than that, third generation or worse. And it means then that people are going to grow up in a dysfunction, and they're going to think that dysfunction is normal. Normal. The thing that was more devastating by this report is we could predict this by zip code. We could tell you the morbidity rates of populations by zip code. We could tell you the medical treatment they would or would not get by zip code. We could tell you the lifetime earnings of children by zip code. Because place matters. And sustainability often doesn't get to what we call place. It is easy to work in the north end of Seattle because Seattle was segregated for so many years. So the north end is a different set of neighborhoods. And so when we looked at something as simple as 125 miles of bike trails, they never went to a poor community. Not one of them. Not even the local trails. If you were poor and you had a bike, you were in the street or on a sidewalk, but you were never on a trail. So when we were looking at rates of obesity, we realized that we were not giving people the ability to walk anywhere safely. There were no bike paths, no wide sidewalks, no running paths, no nothing. So you tell people, eat better. And we're saying, eat better. Eat better. You can give them all the fresh food you want. Fresh food, independent of exercise, does not change obesity rates. Never has and never will. You need people to be. So we know that if you are 1/4 mile from a park like my neighborhood is, you are not going to have obese kids. At a 1/2 mile, a little further. But 3/4 of a mile to a mile from a household, that kid is going to be obese. High percentage. The danger to us is that type 2 diabetes, if it grows at its present rate and present projections, will collapse any healthcare system in the entire world. We're not prepared for it. So this is not an issue to us about whether or not we are giving kids exercise. The issue to us is the underlying healthcare costs of neglect of place. We did not as we thought we were. This is the place where Ambassador Locke and Norm Rice and I lived in Southeast Seattle. That's where the biggest problems were. This was the first place that elected the 3 top executive officers were held by people of color in Washington State, the first time in U.S. history. Yet the neighborhood we were from had the worst outcomes. Sustainability has forgotten our need not to look at social indicators as a data set, but do something about it. It isn't good enough anymore to say those are bad neighborhoods. The issue is how you're going to transform them, how you're going to rebuild them, how you're going to reorganize them so that they will have the same kinds of results. And people say, oh, tell them to move. No, rebuild their neighborhood because, trust me, there isn't enough capacity in any city, in any metropolitan area to take those populations and move them out. It's impossible. And 96% of those populations that move out move back into the same neighborhoods, even if it's failing. And their issue is how I'm treated when I get out. So we just tell people, rebuild them. And why does that happen? Because I moved into a rebuilt neighborhood. Mount Baker in Seattle is a rebuilt neighborhood. Everybody, we were having busing, so everybody moved out of the neighborhood. So people like me said, whoa, look at this. This is an old house. I think I'll go buy this old house. I was the first offer on our house in 6 months. The house next to me was there for 18 months. Now, none of us can move in our neighborhood today. None of us can. We say, whoa, those people are paying some stupid money for those houses, but And we don't tell them how much we pay for our house. I mean, we don't want to really hurt any feelings, but, to us, we don't understand these values. But what happened? It was because there was a group called Southeast Effective Development, and Norm Rice was the vice president, Gary Locke was the vice president, and I was the president, and we went out and said we were going to have parks because they said to us, we'll build you basketball courts. And we said, no, parks. If there's a basketball court, that's fine, when everybody plays basketball. I said, we'll build you a community center. And I said, no. Community centers, you have to play, you got to be a baller to be in a community center. I mean, trust me, my kids were ballers. If you don't got game, you don't go to a community center. Nobody's going to choose you to be on their team. You're going to be ostracized and humiliated, so why go? Parks, a proliferation of parks and trail. So sustainability has to have several elements to it. Social justice is going to be very important, and particularly as the nation colorizes. Because you cannot have 2/3 of the population say, why didn't we get it? And the biggest challenge we're going to have on sustainability is making sure that it's an integrated process, both by race and by income. That everybody sees a benefit and an outcome. And our planning has to take that into consideration. And you're going to have to do remediation whether you like it or not. So you look at the neighborhoods that are not working very well and say, how do we restore and rebuild them? What can we do in a planning process and then in the implementation process so those neighborhoods become viable? Because you can't have an anchor in a community. You can't I was in Austin, Texas. I'll never forget them. Austin's really annoying because they're doing such great work. And they've decided to get the world's fastest computer. UT Texas they want Austin to be the new Texas, not the old Texas. It's really interesting. So we're in Austin for 3 days. So the second day they said to us, we looked at all of our assets, and they have a lot. They are the most popular destination in the country for people under 35 with advanced degrees, right? So that's how they're growing, right? They have strong arts, which is really important in sustainability. Because for whatever reason, I don't care where we are, we need the arts. And just for whatever reason, that's really, really important. And every city since 1990 who's been able to have what we call shallow recessions and get out of them more quickly, and Boston's one of them, have been cities with strong arts emphasis. Lots of parks. But what they did is they looked at East Austin and said, what did they didn't have? East Austin accounted for 80% of the arrests, 80% of the jailings, 80% of the criminal activity. It's a Latino African-American neighborhood. And they said, wow, we've neglected East Austin. That's what we called it, East Austin. It was across the tracks and out of sight, out of way. And they realize that they can't become competitive as a city if East Austin fails. And I'll give you a story about why that's so important. Many of you know Quincy Jones. You've heard his music. Quincy Jones gave a speech, and he was down at the White House. I remember sitting next to him. We were chatting. I really like him. And so I said, you have that wonderful story, I think so powerful, about you and Richard. He says that he used to live right across from Garfield High School. And his house he lived in wasn't all that great. So Quincy Jones, it wasn't all that great. It's still not all that great. So he said, Richard and I used to go upstairs and look out the window. And he would say, I hope somebody hears my music. And Richard used to say, oh, no, I just want to be a lawyer. So I said, Quincy, I smile. The issue is who hasn't heard your music. It's beautiful, and why you're being honored today. And Richard is a federal judge. The reason why it's so important to address those neighborhoods that we often write off under the notion of sustainability because they're difficult and they're challenging is to grab that genius that's in them. Now we know from a study at Johns Hopkins University that we used to assume that poor kids didn't function well or in good school systems. And in fact, Johns Hopkins data says no. Their parents' lives didn't change, but the kids' school performance was unbelievably successful. So that we know that we can't, in an age, the most competitive age ever in the history of the world, not have all hands on deck. China will have more talent by bell curve, so will India. And so our issue is, how do you grab people who we're going to write off if we don't have a deliberate policy of addressing those communities and those neighborhoods? Our actual economic performance over the rest of the century will depend upon it. So why do I love sustainability? I love sustainability because it addresses all of the right issues. I realize that it's got a lot of rhetoric. I mean, people get so depressed over all the criticisms that come to sustainability. You can't use the word, and Article 21 or whatever that thing is, and, woe us, and there's always a fight. You don't know tough yet. You don't know what it looks like. My parents moved to Spokane in 1939. There was no civil rights law in Spokane. So racial discrimination was overt and clear. My father went to Lincoln University because Princeton had a quota. And for whatever reason, he decided to take my mother to Spokane. And for 56 years, she would say, James, when are we returning to civilization? And he would say, next year, Lydia. Let's talk about next year. There was no open housing law, so I got to witness my parents being denied housing because they were black. And the person didn't use that word when he denied them housing. He said, we don't sell houses to niggers. That's what he said right in front of us. My father sued the state of Washington twice to get his job. I lived in a community where they thought nothing would happen. If my neighborhood all of a sudden disappeared, they would have a party. And I remember Mrs. Kirtley and Mrs. Mapps at Calvary Baptist Church, where we'd sit there. And you could tell sometimes when it seemed the whole world had descended on them. And there was no reason to hope and no reason to dream. And Mrs. Mapps, I still love her. I mean, her fried chicken was the best ever made by a human being. And her sister, Mrs. Kirtley, yam pie, sweet potato pie, cherry pie, apple pie, pineapple pound cake. I mean, oh, mercy, mercy. So exquisite. But they would get up, those two ladies, and sing a cappella. Because when they stood up, everybody knew there was something that had to be addressed. But I will not sing to you. I was in a mass choir, and my father stopped the choir of 200 people, looked at me and said, Bud, lip sync. But the lyrics were so simple. I am no ways tired. I've come too far from where I started from. Nobody told me that the road would be easy. But I don't believe he brought me this far to leave me. And what I want to tell you is that we kind of, Sustainability, in my opinion, is the only way this nation will endure. It's conservative financially. It says you grow in your least expensive way, so you do not have to build a roadway. So in King County, our problem was only a sinking bridge, which is going to cost $10 billion when it's all done. But it's a sinking bridge. But I think many of us would rather have it up. But they're going to toll it with variable tolls, which is great. The county to the north, which has 10% of the population that will go across the 520 bridge, has a $4 billion highway problem collecting two centers, Everett to Monroe. And I look and say, those people are already defaulted because they couldn't afford transportation costs. You think they're going to live there? You're going to have abandoned communities. So it is cheaper to build where you already have infrastructure than to build new infrastructure. There is $4 trillion of unfunded infrastructure right now, unfunded, that needs to be fixed now, not later. $4 trillion. Now more is coming, certainly. I mean, nothing lasts forever. $4 trillion with no way of paying for it than to all of a sudden start making people locally pay for it. Because the federal government's made a decision, they're not going to pay for it. It's going to be local. So sustainability is a way of using money smartly and conservatively. So when a person tells me they're a conservative and they don't believe sustainability, I say, no, it's one way or another. If you are a conservative, you will believe in sustainability. The smart use of governmental and private resources. Smart. If you believe that you should be able to live wherever you would like, a gazillion miles away, that's fine. Pay for it on your dime, but don't pay for it on the public's dime. If you want to move out that far, good. We shouldn't give you police. We shouldn't give you fire. We shouldn't give you wastewater. We shouldn't give you whatever is a public benefit because you can't pay enough of it. Let's put it where it can be used the most effective and efficient way. That's a decision we made in King County by law. And sustainability has to have that edge to it. If your goal is to say, I can have a sustainable neighborhood away from a large core city that's 30 to 40 miles away, I will simply tell you, it makes it real difficult to make that work on a numbers basis. It's called a subsidy, and it cannot be sustained over time. And it will not be sustained over the next 60 to 80 years. It's impossible. So sustainability is our way of using money smartly and wisely. It was also interesting because Bill Gates is a wonderful, wonderful philanthropic person. The Bill and Melinda Gates does fantastic work, but he's also a very good business person. And he used to say, I'm not your ATM machine. Poor planning is a signal to your business community that they are the ATM machine. They're too mobile today and too global. They can get up and move. And he was really clear that before he was going to expand his place, it was really, really important to have certain things in place. Parks, arts, really good planning, a variety of housing, deal with homeless people, have clean air, clean water, and clean dirt, fine schools and universities. Other than that, he didn't want very much. But that's what a sustainable community is. It's all those things. You can't silo it anymore. Sustainability is bigger than just one particular act of how we organize and communicate and integrate our efforts. It is bigger than that. It is a solution to so much of what we're faced with today. We look and say, wow, woe us. No, this is the time to seize opportunity. So what if it's difficult? So what? Who cares? I mean, why do something? Why wake up in the morning if something's going to be easy to do? I mean, wow, the meat. You're all really smart. If you want something dull, don't be in sustainability. It is not a dull environment. If you don't want to be exciting and cutting edge, do extraordinary things, challenge yourself, then find another occupation, but sustainability doesn't drive it there because you can't control it. There are too many things that have their own momentum in this society that make sustainability something more of a cause, but not a program. It is not a program. It is not an initiative. is the real issue about how smart we're going to be. Are we going to make sure that the genius in America has a place to stay and grow and flourish? Are we going to make sure that our businesses that are located in our areas are not going to have to waste money on our poor planning, but are going to be able to put that money in jobs, reinvent themselves, new technologies? Are we going to realize that sustainability is the only way I can see to make sure that we have good health in this country? Because if we don't, we're going to have a bill coming because of the failure to address it. When those kids get up and they have type 2 diabetes and we begin to say, whoa, what are we going to do with them? Cut them off health care? You can't do that. But it'll be the most expensive health care in the entire world and collapse our system. Sustainability answers every single major question I can think of. I can't think of any. You know, my wife's from the Philippines. It's really interesting. In her school system, she spoke one language, the bulbs didn't burn too brightly. She speaks Tagalog, Visaya, and Spanish and English, but because I'm monolingual, she doesn't think my bulbs shine too brightly. Anyway, but I find it really interesting because it was she who said, why do you come to America? She was already a U.S. citizen. But why did she decide to leave the Philippines and come to the States? She says, because the United States has opportunity. We were sitting at a lake during our courting period, Green Lake in Seattle. And she was just enthralled with the people on boards and swimming and those boats where you move your feet really fast and nothing happens. The runners, the walkers, everybody. And she said, in the Philippines, we would have built right up to the lake. Sure. And to her, there was something that we did that was different. But you look at our economies, we're drastically different. Because preservation of a shoreline and waterways is important here. But we have people now beginning to say, why are we so busy protecting national forests and national parks? Why are we so busy protecting rivers and streams and lakes? Why don't we go ahead and allow a little bit of pollution because it's good for business? But it is a bad statement. If my wife and I, her being very Catholic and me being very Baptist, she being very extended family, when we got a wedding invitation, she had so many people that I asked her, can I invite somebody like my family? I am meat and potatoes because I'm from Spokane. She is fish and rice. I have now migrated over, but my kids do eat peanut butter and jelly on pan de sal and pan de leche. And yam pie is not negotiable. The reason why I bring that up is that America is a land of diversity and will continue to be. We all got here by boat, plane, and land bridge. All of us did. We are the world's grand experiment because never before in human history has a nation achieved economic and military superiority without having a common gene pool. We are the first. So this isn't an issue anymore of whether or not, who cares? This is an issue of whether the humankind's grand experiment is actually going to work. And it is you who has to make it work. It is you that is going to have the fortitude and the aptitude and the stamina to say, you know, this country will endure all through this century. And we're going to be smarter than ever. But we're going to show the rest of the world why density works, why parks work, why arts work, why small, tight little neighborhoods work, why communities work, even though they may be rural, but they're going to be small. How you can protect ag land and forest lands and natural resource lands. How we can make sure that acidification is not going to be our issue because we're going to attack global warming and we're going to attack adaptation. How watching fish spawn and watching the orca whales, which are beautiful when you see them, they're magnificent, they just play with you, they're great. All that beauty, all of that treasure that is this country is in your hands. But there's no other way to change course other than sustainability. It is not going to be resolved by sprawl. It is not going to be resolved by the continued removal of our natural resources and our abuse of them. We're going to have to be smarter than ever. But if you're going to be smart, this is the best country to be smart in. So all I want to say to you is that sustainability has to be a cause, not a task, not an initiative, not a program, not a regional deliberation. The real essence of sustainability is its ability to tackle every major issue we have and resolve them. Resolve them. Fix them. Densities require people to live together and to figure it out. So whether you're rich or poor, no matter what your language is or your religion is or your race is, you're going to have to figure it out. But okay, my neighborhood is working really hard to figure it out. I'm in the only neighborhood where somebody says, God, he's got mosques in the neighborhood, he's got synagogues in his neighborhood, he has every single faith he can think of, and he has Buddhist temples and Japanese shrines. You know, it's just great. It is great. It's like going to a store and seeing all these different people in a single neighborhood. So I know it works. I know how beautiful it is. I know how beautiful it is. All I want to make sure is that wherever my perfect granddaughter moves, it's going to be beautiful. The people are going to be beautiful. The communities are going to be beautiful. It's going to be beautiful. So I saw all the reports today that lead you to one thing. Sustainability is an extraordinary thing. It's ours. It's going to be extraordinary. You know, in closing, I'll give you two stories. The first is that I remember my oldest son, I got letters from his school all the time. So I got a letter when he was in ninth grade. A letter said, Dear Mr. Sims, thank you for volunteering to be the parent chaperone on the Mount Rainier climb. Mount Rainier is 14,300 feet. You're taking in 1/3 less oxygen than you're taking in right now. So I remember looking at my wife saying, look what the sadist did to me this time. But through a series of processes, I remember visualizing myself to be the base camp cook, using my binoculars to watch them ascend the mountain. So I went to the first parent meeting. They said, Mr. Sims, you're on rope team number 4. I went to my doctor of 21 years without an appointment and sat there till he saw me. And I said to him, when he did see me, I said, Mike, you're going to make the most important medical decision you've ever made. I want to know whether we are Mike and Ron or doctor patient. You have no idea how important your answer is. So he looked and said, well, I hope after 21 years, we're Mike and Ron. I said, Mike, I need you to write a letter to the school giving them a medical reason why I should not climb Mount Rainier. He said, friends don't tell friends to lie. So young women did not want to climb with young men. Young women said that young men are obnoxious, careless, not conscientious, and therefore would lead us into every crevasse on the side of the mountain. Young men said of young women, they are weak, and where were they going to go to the bathroom? And young people looked at people my age and said, oh, God, too old, way too old. There are things in life, though, that are meant to show you that you are a very small part of something wonderfully extraordinary. And Mount Rainier is one of them. Clouds flirt with you. They come at you, kiss you, and then scoot. They play hide and seek, and they dance so beautifully. Dance and dance. There is a place that you see that has no horizon because it's endless. There is air so fresh, so sweet. It thrills body and soul. You ever lay on a glacier late at night and touch every star? I was on a rope team with 3 young women. They said, Mr. Sims, are you ready? I said, yes, and zoom, up we went, because young women do not climb mountains, they fly up mountains. It's great. Young men can handle heavier loads, and people of my age know that mountains, literally and figuratively in life, are conquered one step at a time. But what I learned on that mountain is that everybody counts on a rope team. You're as fast as the slowest member, and you're as strong as the weakest member. Everybody counts. In sustainability, that has to be our belief, that we're on a rope team and everybody is integral and important on that rope team. And my last story will be about time. When my granddaughter was it had changed. When I remember when my oldest son was born, I put, the thing over my head, walked down the hall. It was Lamaze, and I'm walking down the hall, and the nurses said, Mr. Sims, over your mouth, not over your head. My calm approach also went into the room, not knowing whether or not I was going to have a boy or a girl. I just started yelling, "Go Doug." I have no idea why that came out. It was just "Go Doug." So I said "Go Doug" rather than push, and then all of a sudden the nurses started saying "Go Doug, go Doug," and the doctor said, "Here comes Doug, here comes Doug," and I told my wife I was a great birth coach. She told me I was really annoying, but anyway, out he came, and then there was an umbilical cord, and the doctor said, "You want to cut the umbilical cord?" I said, "Yes." So the doctor gave me the scissors to cut it, and then I had an epiphany. I thought the more umbilical cord, the better his chances. So he almost became the first person in medical history with a 4-foot drying umbilical cord. Doctor said, no, here. So I cut it, and you had that moment of terror and a moment of joy. So nowadays, though, the birthing room is like a living room. Right? TVs, and they don't have any Bose speakers yet, but they'll get those there in time. Large crowd. And so when she was being birthed, I stepped out of the room, and then her mother came out and says, "It's not going to bother her, so it shouldn't bother you, so come back in." So I did, and looking over my son's shoulder, and my very perfect granddaughter was born. And then the doctor said, "Doug, do you want to cut the umbilical cord?" And he did. At that moment, I realized how fast time flies. How fast it is. Where do all these years go? Just poof. Five weeks ago, I was looking at a series of numbers. Watching the numbers like a countdown. Just watching it. And watching those numbers. And then the doctor looked at me, and I told my brother's family and his friends that my brother was in heaven. Those machines was taking him off life support and watching the descent to his death. I remember that because it seemed like we were going to be eternal twins. Just eternal. We were going to live to 120, 140 if we were in good shape. With dreams and hopes. My brother's journey is complete. I will miss him, as anybody will always miss a twin, for the rest of my life. I don't ever expect to get over it because twins have a certain magic. We finish sentences before, as my wife said, you guys don't even complete them before you guys start laughing. There's just something about twins. But his journey is complete. Yours is not. For a higher authority than anybody in this room has determined, you've been given one more day, one more week, one more year, career, because you have a task ahead. And it is a formidable task ahead. But you've been given that gift. And don't hide nor run away from it. Welcome that gift called a challenge of sustainability. Don't get tired because because people argue with you about it. Because in the end, my granddaughter Amina will look, and she'll look back and she'll say, "Wow, they saved this country." That's all they did. They saved it. They saved it. Peace and prosperity to you.